Hey there. Not 2 weeks after we recorded this webinar, this Department of War changed the CMMC Phase II requirements, primarily by putting on pause the audit requirement, which was due November 10th. What that means is it bought us more time. Everything that you see in this webinar is accurate, it's up to date, and it's what you need to do to be able to satisfy the 110 controls to become CMMC compliant. The only difference is now we have more time to study for the test.
Afternoon, welcome. Today we are going to be discussing CMMC Level 2. We're going to dive into what it really means and how to get ready. Presenters for today are going to be Mark Jamison, who is the President and CEO. We've got Tom Guerin, who is our CTO, and we have Alex Jamison, who is our Senior Solutions Engineer. So if you're not familiar with 2W Technologies, we're a technology solutions and managed service provider specializing in solutions for both manufacturing and distribution. We've been in business for over 33 years. We are one of Epicor's largest partners, as well as a large Microsoft partner. I'm going to now turn it over to Mark, and he's going to get started.
Hey, thanks, Sue. So this is what we're gonna cover today. And look, if CMMC has felt like a moving target, a bunch of acronyms and anxiety, you're not alone. We talk to our clients all the time about this. And so our goal today is to not overwhelm, but do the exact opposite, which is demystify. CMMC is, if you take it from the right approach, is achievable, and it's actually not as complicated as you think it is. Keep this in mind as we walk through this presentation, that compliance is not a product you buy, and it isn't something that happens automatically by just moving to the cloud. It's the right infrastructure to protect your controlled information and the right processes and the documentation to prove it, right? We've walked a lot of our defense contractors through this type of process. And so we're going to share with you some of the stuff we know today and what we've done. And with that, let's get running. So this is what CMMC actually is. It's 110 security requirements over 14 control families, right? And the core focus on it is unclassified information, or CUI. So if you touch CUI, we'll talk about what that is in a little bit. If you touch it, you need to account for it. So, hey, Alex, we're going to talk a ton about CUI, and we're going to say that word about 4,000 times in the next 45 minutes. But what is it really?
Yeah, so CUI is at its very core, it's anything that any information that can be used to build, replicate, understand what you're supplying to the DoD. And so what does that mean? A couple examples here, right, would be your engineering drawings, CAD files, technical specs, your bill of materials, production data, project emails, and even procurement information. And it's not just, and those seem like they might be some obvious ones, but it's not just the obvious of, hey, here's the recipe on how to make this. It also can be the emails talking about your projects, supplier communications, shipping and sourcing details. And so anything that's tied to, really one thing, but anything that's tied to the production, how it's made, where it comes from, is typically going to be in scope. And then once CUI shows up, it pulls everything with it. And that's why it's so important to focus on the CUI. because as soon as you have CUI, it pulls in the systems it lives in, pulls in the users who have access, the applications it touches, and the integrations that's around it are now all in scope of CMMC compliance.
So, hey, Tom, why are we messing with this now? Why is this a thing?
Yeah, so, thanks, Mark. Historically, contractors, they were already expected to meet NIST 800-171, which is those 110 controls. So those aren't new controls necessarily. But the government and therefore, the whole supply chain that flows down from there is now formalizing how that compliance gets assessed and how it's tied to contracts and the issuance of new contracts and new orders. So today, July 1st, when we're recording this, we're in phase one. So that focuses primarily on level 1 and level 2 self-assessments, the things that a lot of people have been familiar with. Phase 2 starts November 10th of 2026. It's been pushed, it's been moved, it's really going to happen November 10th of 2026. And that's when level 2 certification by third-party authorization organizations becomes the standard requirement for solicitations. So new contracts, new orders under existing contracts are going to start hinging on, depending on that third-party certification at level 2. So the shift is
the simplest way that I could describe this is level 1 is pinky promise, and level 2 is somebody actually is looking at it, auditing it, and proving that you're where you need to be. Okay, so what happened, right? What happened that forced all this stuff to happen now?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the real reason for all of this is the supply chain, right? So, the core logic of all of this is that the government wants confidence in that the companies that are handling contract information and controlled unclassified information, and then all of the subs and subcontractors that they flow it to, that they're actually protecting it. And that matters to manufacturers because the risk moves through design data, procurement data, quality data, supplier communications, shared systems, all that stuff that Alex was talking about, right? And really pretty expansively throughout all that. So it's not just classic IT systems. It's no longer just your ERP or no longer just my CAD drawings or something like that. So really, we want to look at it a little bit further and what does it look like in day-to-day operations, right? So not just in regulation. And that's where we go. So, Alex, why don't you start us off here and we'll kind of work our way through this.
Alex, you're talking to our clients every day on this stuff virtually. Yeah. So what does this look like in real life?
Well, the good news is it doesn't mean you have to memorize all 110 controls. It kind of breaks down into these 4 buckets that we have here. And the first one is looking at access controls. Do people have access to the right information? Do you have MFA in place? Are admin privileges controlled? Are you using named accounts versus shared accounts? It's all about being able to show, not tell. Right. The next big bucket here is logging and monitoring. This is the big show part. Is can you actually see what's happening in your environment? Can you detect suspicious activity? Can you provide what is happening on a daily basis with your information and who's asking it and accessing it to auditors? So that's your logging and monitoring. Then you have your configurations, which is just, are your systems up to date and supported by the manufacturer? Are they configured consistently and securely? And then the last bit, which is everybody's favorite thing to do, is documentation. Document. And that's the big difference between the CMMC Level 2 is you have to document so then you can show. It's all about show, don't tell.
And both you guys are involved in this with our clients on a regular basis. And where are the gaps? Where are we seeing our clients struggle as they try to do that thing in real life?
The biggest struggle is companies understanding where CUI actually lives. And the obvious ones, it lives in our file servers. Oh, it lives in our ERP. Those are the obvious ones. What you don't know is, where they might struggle is it living in a external application, or does an integration pull that information and outside of scope? That is one of the bigger ones, is external integrations and where is all of my information going? The obvious ones of ERP and file server are easy to knock down, but it's finding all of the, where the other pieces of CUI might live. That I think is the number one. Outside of that, oh, Tom, sorry, didn't we cut you off there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, that underline that really, it's that sprawl we're seeing a lot more of, that sprawl into other systems. Again, it's no longer your CAD, no longer just your ERP, but it's those shared paths, shared storage areas, integrations, things like that. That's, the web weaves, further and further out inside the org.
Mm-hmm. And the other pieces where we see struggles would be, weak or inconsistent MFA coverage. You need that across the board everywhere. On top of that is monitoring and logging. You might be doing it in some places, but it has to be done everywhere. And that's the big catch, is it's got to be done everywhere. And then the last one, which is arguably the most fun part of it, is any unsupported systems, shared accounts, or undocumented tribal knowledge. So what does that mean? That means no 2012 R2 servers. That means no shared shop floor computer access. Everything has to be a named user, so back to the logging, who's accessing what. And then everyone's favorite, which is the tribal knowledge of, we know how to do those processes. We know how to do them. We've been doing them for years and years and years. But you have to have it written down to be able to show the auditor, oh, this is what we're actually doing, and someone can go look how to do this process, not just, hey, I go ask the guy to my right how to do it. Oh, yep, he reminded me, and away I go.
So guys, no, go ahead, Tom.
That what Alex just said there, incomplete evidence is really I think the big takeaway note there. We're not seeing orgs fail because they didn't do anything. I mean, there's obviously those out there, but we're not even hearing from those. What we're seeing are ones that fail because either the scope didn't match reality. So like Alex was saying, they didn't scope wide enough to include where they needed to, where responsibilities aren't explicit, or where their documentation or evidence lags what's happening in their live environment. So I just wanted to underline that last piece, that incomplete evidence is a big one right now.
Yeah, as I watch this, it seems as though, it's all these pieces, but it's almost the aggregate of all the pieces combined that sometimes crush people, because it is so detailed and there's so many things, and there's a lot of aha moments, or, oh no, we forgot about that. Mm-hmm. Right. So Tom, talk a little bit about, okay, so this is where the challenge lies, but how do we actually deliver this and get this into action in real life?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to put together, a kind of a simple model here, right? So this is an executive level model, foundation, controls, and ownership, right? And if any of these are weak, everything else gets really hard and really expensive. So it's not just about a technical exercise; it's really about designing an architecture here to follow and be responsible for. So I just want to start off and work through these three. If we start with the foundation, Mark, this is really the bridge into the whole thing. So, the important thing here is it's not about buy a certain product or buy a certain queue and suddenly you're compliant, right? We see this a lot. We do a lot, of course, in Azure, and we see a lot of, oh, well, we need to be GCC and that'll make us compliant. Well, no, just buying GCC doesn't make you compliant. It may help and it may check a lot of boxes off, but, it's more about choosing the environment that matches the contract and the type of CUI that you're dealing with, right? So, and match your sovereignty. There are people on the call, someone through the list, who are outside the U.S. Different rules apply, different sovereignty rules apply. So you need to match an environment with your sovereignty. There's again, we deal with GCC High, Azure Government, and those can really strongly support CMMC and ITAR type use cases when used appropriately. And for defense manufacturers and subcontractors and subcontractors, that GCC High and Azure Gov foundation is generally the cleanest and most defensible path, especially if you've got ITAR involved, if ITAR's been floated around. But those had the stricter residency requirements, things like that. So I don't want to leave anybody with that there's a single right answer. But once the foundation is right, really the next question becomes, how do you prove the controls are actually operating?
So
right?
Before we go on to that, I just want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. we'll have plenty of time at the end to get to all your questions. All right, controls, Tom.
Yeah, so this is where, those technical controls start to turn into audit evidence, right? So, identity, data protection, logging, and documentation, those all need objective proof. It's not good enough to just say, well, we've got MFA, see the checkbox is checked, right? I need to be able to show my sign-in logs. I need to retain those properly. I need to have a procedure and a process in place that's documented that we are reviewing them and how are they being reviewed and who's reviewing them and what their findings were and how we're dealing with issues. And that's true across all of these, right? And again, documentation tends to be one of those things that lags. So making sure that that's up to date, that it's being reviewed regularly, and that you're keeping the logs of those things. Simple in and of itself, but it can be a lot, especially if you are trying to tackle it all at once, or a month before the auditors show up or before your trial audit. So the assessors are looking for a coherent story, right? They want to know that your controls and the live environment and all of the evidence all line up with each other. And that's, just to give a sneak behind the curtain, that's what the auditors or the assessors are really looking for. And lining those things up really brings us to the last piece here, the shared responsibility question. So when we talk about responsibility, accountability is not transferable, right? So the contractor, the end contractor or sub owns the certification and all the organizational controls, right? So they own it. They're accountable and they can't transfer that accountability. But they're going to have a string of providers that support defined pieces of technical or control part of the stack, right? So, what I think we want to really underline here is that this has to be documented control by control. Again, there's those clear 110 controls. Who owns it? How's it divided? How's it documented? How's it handed off? In the environments that we work in a lot, we might have where we're controlling security and auditing around a set of Azure, servers and databases and resources, things like that. Where you've got a software vendor like Epicor that's providing security patches and that is providing guidance on auditing and logging and things like that. And then you've got maybe a partner, it might be 2W, it might be a different partner that's providing configuration and things like that. And then at the end, you've got the customer, the contractor, and again, they're fully accountable ultimately. So they're the ones who are reviewing all those things, putting those pieces together, providing the information to those other partners. So it's not just who does what, it's can you prove who does what, and does that match the reality, when checked. So I think
that shared responsibility matrix is really important, and I think it gets overlooked initially because nobody thinks about it, right? You're thinking about your own controls and your own data, and you're trying to do your own COI audit. But the fact of the matter is this takes a lot of people, and it takes a village to really pull this off, particularly around your ERP system where a lot of your COI already lives. So hey, Alex, so we're going down this path, and there's all these folks out there, and they want to know, what do they do, and how do you start, and how does it work? So could you kind of walk everybody through this?
Yeah, the first step is just identifying where CUI exists. And the big one here is where it exists. You might, as you go through and understanding your scope, you might miss some things here and there. That's where we can go in and help out. What you need to do is start somewhere. So start identifying, okay, I know there's CUI in my emails. I know it's in my file server. I know it's in my ERP. And start to identify where your baseline of scope is going to be. Then from there, perform a gap assessment. Measure it against those 110 controls. Look at, what are we doing today? What aren't we doing today? Do we have documentation on all of our paths? And then the big one, and this is, I can't reiterate this enough, define ownership. Who owns what? If I have a partner, what does that partner own? If I have an internal team, which specific individuals own documentation, which specific individuals own enforcement, and making sure who has what. Where we see a lot of issues, you just assume. And we assume that somebody else is doing this piece, or this group has this. And we all know what happens when you assume. We've all had that teacher that told us, right? So never assume, always make sure you know who has ownership. Following that is everyone's favorite, building documentation. So building your SSPs and your POAMs, your plan of actions on how you're going to get, what are your policies on what you're doing today. And then if there is anything that needs remediation, that's where the POAM comes into place. It's your plan of action of, hey, we know this is a problem. Here's how we're going to fix it. Then it gets all downhill from there. Then you implement your controls. You implement any additional security monitoring logging that you need. Then it's audit prep, get audited. And then step 7, which can't forget, is CMMC is not something you do once. I have it. Awesome. Never need to mess with this again. CMMC is something that you live by and you'll operate your business by indefinitely. And so you need to make sure that you're staying up to date on your documentation, that your systems are maintained, and that all those underlying connections, if anything's added into the environment, that it's added to the documentation. So there's the continual phase of CMMC compliance that I think it's overlooked, but it's a really important thing to talk about when it comes to roadmap.
That's a really good point, because what's going to happen is you go through this sprint of getting certified, and then you pass your audit, then everybody's exhausted and they stop. But the one thing that doesn't stop is your business doesn't stop. And the other thing that doesn't stop is the technology doesn't stop, right? I mean, that's the one guaranteed, death, taxes, and the fact you're going to have to upgrade your technology. And it's and I think you're right. I think that gets left behind, so that, you don't want to get surprised when it's the next thing, or somebody's in your shared responsibility matrix, or has ownership who has left the company or retired or something, right? I mean, so it is a constant effort.
Yeah, Mark.
So go ahead, Tom.
I just add a little bit onto that as well, especially with the maintain compliance. One of the things that we're seeing is most of our clients that we're working with are falling into a annual affirmation and every 3-year assessment. So, we haven't reached 3 years into CMMC Level 2 yet, but as we get to those 3rd years, what you can expect, and what we're expecting, is that the assessors will go back and look at those interim affirmations. So if you're doing self-affirmation or attestation every year, and then doing every 3-year cycle of assessment or audit, they're going to go back and look and make sure that those affirmations matched up as well. And I know we keep saying it, but I want to keep saying it, document.
And that is the least fun part of this whole process, but it's the most important. So I think it's important to, we try not to make this a sales presentation, and we try to make this all informational, but I think it's important to show how 2W fits into this process and what we're doing in this process. And whether it's us or somebody else, we would encourage everybody to reach out and get help in part of this. And so this is the process. This is what we've been doing for our clients, is working through the scope, the gaps, the risk areas. We'll run network assessments, try to figure out, if you've got old, there's a lot of, you might have some Windows 7 machines. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? So we'll help you do that process, and then we'll help design the environment and the architecture for the protection. And that's a big piece of what this is. And quite frankly, that's a big piece of what we're doing for our clients, is whether we set it up, whether it's a server that's locked in a closet that has the appropriate controls to it, or we stand it up in a GCC high environment, or we have to enclave the data in a different way. We're working with some international clients where we have to go at it a different way because they don't have a CMMC 2 type environment. in their country. We can design all of that, and that's kind of the specialty piece of this. Because if you don't do that right, you're going to be in trouble immediately. And then, making it happen, turning on the licenses. Are you sending CUI through email, right? Well, then you need GCC compliant email exchange servers. And then what we'll do also is we will help you prep for that audit, and we will, if need be, we'll participate in the mock audit, and we'll meet with the auditor and show them what we've done there. And then, of course, help maintain and move that up. Now you're going to have to do your own documentation, but unfortunately, but we're going to be able to help you with the technology piece to make sure that your technology doesn't get out of scope. Guys, did I miss anything there?
No, we'll help with the scope, design, implementation, evidence, and sustainment. And you, the contractor, you still own your certification. Yeah,
it's ultimately it's your business, and it is on you. So what do I do now? Well, the first thing we should probably do is get a readiness assessment spun up. Again, this is something we can help you for. There's also you may have consultants of your own who can take care of this, but this first place to start. Then look at the COI scope. Where does the COI data exist? It exists in places that you're not even thinking of, like packing slips. And so you need to make sure that you've got all that stuff figured out and taken care of, and then develop the responsibility matrix. That's not an easy task. We have some stuff already pre-canned for some of the stuff that we do within the Epicor ecosystem, but figuring out, the key is figure out where you are today, right? And where you got to go and where your jumping off point is, so then you can figure out how to bring this whole thing in for a landing. So, Sue?
Okay.
Take us
First
away.
question. You mentioned early in the call about Microsoft expertise. Do you also work within Google Workspace, GCP environments?
Tom, you want to take that?
Sure, I can jump in with that. It's a little bit of a painful question, a hot spot for us. So can we support your endeavors there? Yes, we can work with you on that for sure. And I'm not going to say that it's not possible to get all the way through your assessments successfully in that environment. However, it's been our experience that the controls inheritance and the management of those controls in the Google Cloud, the Google Suite, is way looser and far more difficult to manage and demonstrate. So, for those who've got an option, we would recommend, at least for your CUI, if you're able to enclave it out, if you're able to draw a line around it and box it out, consider boxing it out and putting it into an environment that's a lot more easy to deal with.
Very nice stance. So let me be a little bit more direct. I can tell you today that we know exactly the buttons and the switches we need to pull to work within the Microsoft framework, and we can get you compliant within the Microsoft framework in relatively short order from an infrastructure perspective, just because of the way that stuff's designed and our expertise.
All right, next question. What is the average cost to get CMMC certified?
Depends on where you start, right, guys? I mean, it's, if you're starting from zero and you've got a bunch of 2008 on-prem servers, it's probably going to be relatively painful. So I think the cost itself, there's probably two costs. There's going to be the consultant cost, and then there's going to be the infrastructure changes, and then there's going to be the internal cost of doing the documentation. So I know that's a non-answer, but it's I think it really depends, guys. What do you say?
It depends is a good solid answer, I think. I would like to draw at least around the infrastructure pieces in particular. So those upgrades, those updates, things like that, even some of the process documentation, those are good business anyway. So, while you may consider that as part of your compliance costs, those are things that you want to be doing anyway. So from my perspective, I'd be looking more at what's the assessment costs, what's the professional services costs, and then what's our overhead for documentation and things like that. So that's how I would divide that up and start tackling it. The technical debt that you may have and have to deal with is something that you should be dealing with anyway. Those are just really a required part of business now.
Okay, just a couple more, it looks like. What is the difference between being audit ready and being certified?
So go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, audit ready means you're ready to go sit down in front of the assessor, give your evidence, and be able to ask questions. As soon as you're certified, that means that the assessor has interrogated you, you've provided all the necessary information, and they've given you that stamp of approval. And so one is, hey, I'm leading up to it, and then the post audit is when you get certified.
Ultimately, that certification is going to be, at least if we're talking specifically about CMMC Level 2, it's going to come from Department of Defense. That's where the certification is going to come from, or Department of War. So there, there's all of the things that you do and get your business right and work with maybe the prime contractor that you're subbing to, things like that. Those are all readiness. And then there's, if you've gone through the registration and certification process, which may or may not be required depending on the contracts that you're acting on. Your upstream contractor is going to require you to do these things, and you're going to have to pass the assessment with them. And then it's up to them whether or not they are going to have you be required to actually go through the certification, which is a different cost and is directly ultimately with the government. If you are a prime contractor, I don't know if there's anybody from Lockheed on here or whatever, then that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with those certification for sure if you're a prime. Otherwise, it's going to depend on the contract that you're signing.
Okay, next question. If I'm reading this one correctly, I think they're asking if they're not CMMC at all certified, do they have to go after CMMC 1 or go straight to CMMC 2?
The short answer is it's going to depend on the contracts that you're looking to sign and who you're working with. So it's not a stepping stone. You don't need to go from one to the next to the next. CMMC Level 1 deals primarily with federal contracting information. So that's where sometimes you're going to get drawings, things like that. It could be more like the actual vendor information, the contract, the specifics of the contract. Whereas Level 2 deals much more with your business, how you're manufacturing things, your process, your recipe, and your internal controls. So they're two different certifications. If you've got Level 2, you're almost certainly a shoe-in for Level 1, but not vice versa. But they're not stepping stones to get from one to the next. Hopefully that answered.
Tom,
if not, reach out. Yeah, Alex.
And Tom, let's talk a little bit too on the different certification, right? So CMMC Level 1 is a self-attestation, right? You're saying, hey, I self-certify. While Level 2 is you have to go in front of a third-party auditor and have it be certified that way. So that's also the big difference. One is easier than 2, but if you don't have to go 1 then 2, you can go straight to CMMC 2. And that's what a lot of our clients do, is they don't have Level 1. They're jumping straight to CMMC 2.
Yeah.
Okay. You may have touched on this in your presentation, but if our cloud provider says they are compliant, does that reduce our burden?
So it depends on what your cloud provider means. So if we're talking about, and I'm going to, there's a variety of different data that could be stored and how it's being stored, right? So If your cloud provider is a hosting provider and is providing hosting services, and then let's say you're installing your ERP system on a VM that is in AWS or in Azure or what have you, you can inherit some of the controls that they're providing. So to take Azure specifically, because it's what we deal with all day, both Azure Commercial and Azure Government Cloud and all of the higher levels beyond Government Cloud are all fed. They all meet FedRAMP. They all meet these requirements. They have provisional operating states for those. So the VMs themselves, the VMs that I stand up there are able to directly inherit those controls. What we do there, how it gets managed, audited, documented, and so on, is up to either us or to to the client, to the contractor ultimately. So just hosting in one of these environments doesn't solve it for you. Now, if you have a cloud, like a SaaS ERP system that is hosted, and they're asserting that they're CMMC Level 2, I'd have some questions for them, I guess. So CMMC Level 2 applies to contractors. It doesn't apply to software vendors or companies. So the cloud provider can be set up in a way that allows you to do CMMC Level 2. So they give you the controls and the visibility that you need to be able to do that. But they themselves, it may or may not be, but it wouldn't be relevant to you. I was kind of dancing a bit around that, but hopefully that answers that. Mark or Alex, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of misinformation in the marketplace right now around this, which is part of the reason why we decided to do this webinar. But I think Tom hit it on the head, and this is important to understand, is that software and companies are not CMMC2. That's not a thing. Although you're going to hear that probably from companies and software and other solution providers. It's your company, and it's these things that we talked about. It's the enclaving of your CUI, and it's the documentation, and it's all the stuff we just talked about for the last half hour that allows your company to be CMMC2 certified. And unfortunately, there is no magic easy button to get you there.
Yeah. And again, you can inherit some things from them. So, they can I'll use Microsoft. They can, provide documentation and audits and all of that, showing that only U.S. persons can have access to the data and the systems, and that the backups are handled in a way that's consistent with federal policies and certain controls and rules, and you're able to get those logs and things like that, right? They can tick some of the boxes for you, but they're not just by having your ERP there or having your email there or whatever the system is. That doesn't impart CMMC to you.
Indeed, if you don't enclave your data appropriately, but you're in all the, maybe it'll help you get through some of the physical controls of access, but you also have to make sure that your data is enclaved appropriately, so that the people who need to see it can see it, and nobody else, the people who own it, can get to it, and nobody else can get to it. I guess that's kind of the poor man's definition of what that is.
Yeah, and that's, that also speaks a little bit to, early on, Alex was talking about, those other integrations, that sprawl I mentioned, right? Something that we see, and when we start doing these assessments with people, these early reviews and assessments, is they've got a good setup and things are well handled, except that they're pushing their some automations out to a third-party service that's running in a commercial cloud in a shared tenant environment. And they're running CUI over that, or they're pushing their attachments that have got CAD documents to a third-party shared provider. Everything else is great, except that they're sending CUI out there into an area where they've got no control and no visibility. That kind of, at that point, an assessor is going to look at that and go, you've got a problem here. How are we going to compensate for this?
Okay, we still have a couple more questions coming in. What is the difference between CMMC 2 and 3?
So
question.
I think I can take that one here. And Tom, if I misspeak, cut me off. But so CMMC 2 is all around CUI and controlling that CUI. While level 3 is an additional step on top of CMMC 2 that is more for specialized high priority defense programs. And so there's additional controls, and that audit is run directly by the government versus a third party assessor. So CMMC 2 is, if you're receiving CUI, you're more than likely going to have to be CMMC level 2 compliant. And while level 3 will be if you're involved in any special programs that, highly sensitive from the government. And I think you would know if you're involved in one of those programs. Tom,
Yeah,
did I speak there? What I missed?
Well, I think that's the key part there. It's going to come down to your contract, whatever the contract is you're signing. You could be making a part that it ends up in a part that ends up in a part that ends up in a missile, right? It may very well be that your part is subject to some of those stricter special program requirements, and you're going to hear about it. It's going to be in your contracts. If it's not in your contracts, you're almost certainly looking at level 2, which would also be in your contract. But special program access type stuff, you would have called out as level 3. They are tighter controls, stricter controls. It's more about isolation though than anything else. Just to peek behind the curtain there a little bit, think a lot stricter isolation.
All right, I think this is the last question, unless something else comes in while you're answering this one. Does working as a subcontractor with CUI, not a direct contractor, mean we would still need 2.0 or not necessarily?
Generally, yes.
Yeah, ultimately it'll be in the contracts that you're signing, but generally yes, and you should expect that you're going to need to be, if what you're doing is providing something that ends up as part of the defense industrial based supply chain. You should expect that, and you'd be surprised. We have clients that make springs that it's just a spring, but that spring ends up in a really important part somewhere way upstream, and they're now required. So,
So big take is, if you're handling CUI, if you have CUI, if you touch CUI, more than likely you're going to have to adhere to this compliance. Now, there's always going to be an edge case here or there, but a good rule of thumb is if CUI, then CMMC level 2 compliance is needed.
So I think that's it, guys. No more questions. So thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.